Is there any path to reinstatement for Jimmy Kimmel, who honestly occupies a very particular celebrity niche in LA?
He does, and I actually have some brand new reporting for you, Casey, just hearing from a source that yesterday Jimmy Kimmel had a meeting with Disney executives in the Century City law office here in Los Angeles with his lawyer, his manager, and Disney executives. I am hearing that there was no resolution, so we don't know what the path forward is yet. But as you said, I have heard from my sources that Disney is hopeful. They would like to find a way to bring him back, but obviously, a lot of questions there that have to be answered, so that remains to be seen. But just now, we're not just hearing from the late-night host that you just showed. We are also hearing from Conan O'Brien. Let me read you his tweet, and then I'm going to tell you why this is really significant. He says, quote, "The suspension of Jimmy Kimmel and the promise to silence other late-night hosts for criticizing the administration should disturb everyone on the right, left, and center. It's wrong, and anyone with a conscience knows it's wrong." Now, this is not just another comedian speaking out to support Jimmy Kimmel. This is Conan O'Brien, who hosts the Oscars for, well, ABC. He hosted the Oscars last year. Or earlier this year, rather. He has already announced to host the Oscars next year in 2026. And part of the reason why Conan was hired to host the Oscars after Jimmy Kimmel had hosted for so many years is because he is a rather apolitical comedian. When I interviewed the head of the Academy before the Oscars, he told me that that was one of the reasons why they love Conan. He's a great comedian, but he's also apolitical. But what Conan is getting at in his tweet here, when he says it should disturb anyone on the right, left, and center, he is saying that this really goes above politics, that free speech is obviously fundamental in this country and that comedians should be allowed to do that, politics aside. Now, one more tweet that I want to read to you from someone entirely different is former Disney CEO Michael Eisner, who has weighed in on all of this. He says, quote, "Where has all the leadership gone? If not for university presidents, law firm managing partners, and corporate chief executives standing up against bullies, who then will step up for the First Amendment?" He goes on to call the FCC's threats aggressive yet hollow, and he says just another example of out of control intimidation. And then he says, by the way, for the record, this ex-CEO finds Jimmy Kimmel very talented and funny. Now, final point, Casey, I will tell you, I am hearing from my sources across the industry that everyone is really waiting to see what ABC is going to do. They are firmly standing behind Kimmel. When I say that, I'm talking about the overall Hollywood artist community. And the artist creative community wants Disney to take a stand and to defend Jimmy Kimmel.
Fair enough. Elizabeth Wagmeister with that reporting. Elizabeth, thank you very much for that. And our panel joins us now, congressional correspondent for the New York Times, Annie Carney, national political reporter for Axios, Alex Thompson, the former DNC senior advisor, communications director, Xochitl Hinojosa, and the former speaker pro tempore of the House of Representatives, Patrick McHenry. We also have back with us for the second day our Arena text chain. You're going to see it on the left side of your screen. It's going to be another conversation that you can watch if you happen to have us on mute. You will see some additional analysis from some of our top reporters. That conversation already underway, so feel free to follow along as we dig in here at the table to this top story. And Patrick McHenry, I actually want to kick us off by playing something that Senator Ted Cruz said today about this on his podcast, because there are some very real free speech absolutists in the Republican Party, and he seems to be positioning himself as one of them. Let's watch what Cruz said.
What he is saying is Jimmy Kimmel was lying. That's true. He was lying. And his lying to the American people is not in the public interest. And so he threatens explicitly, we're going to cancel ABC's license. We're going to take him off the air so ABC cannot broadcast anymore. And I got to say, he threatens it. He says, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way.
Yeah,
and I got to say, that's right out of Goodfellas. That's right out of a mafioso coming into a bar going, nice bar you have here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
It would be a shame if something happened to it.
Can we start with the accent, first of all?
I mean, that was
like,
really
not the best
something.
thing.
Yeah.
Look, the point here is whether or not the FCC has this authority. They have long had this authority. And if you're a part of the liberal orthodoxy and the FCC has used it, you like what they're doing because it's a part of the liberal orthodoxy, at least historically. And they've tried to cancel different things. There's been this long debate about this, about FCC using their powers to police speech with their licensees. They have this power. It's not new. What is new about it is using that very same power by a conservative against a liberal. The way I look at it as a traditional conservative is the FCC should not have these powers. It is a ridiculous thing for a government agency to be policing speech like this. But as for me as a conservative, Jimmy Kimmel is unwatchable. He is not funny. You will not have a single conservative say, I watch Jimmy Kimmel and I'm entertained. So he has his own brand. And I think him being removed from late night TV was about him being unfunny. Conan O'Brien, far funnier. As a conservative, I think he's much more balanced. Like the other Jimmy's better. His ratings are better. So, I mean, look, this is like, you can get into this whole debate. But the fact that the left out of Hollywood is going to come and fight the Trump administration, it's exactly what they want.
Well, but in that interview, Ted Cruz also made a very good point about speech. But then he said, if there is a Democratic president, what happens if they start going after conservative podcasts, Fox News, other conservative, potentially, hosts?
Okay, I want to bring in Sam Stein, managing editor at The Bulwark. Charlie Dent is a former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania and executive of the Aspen Institute Congressional Program. And here with me in studio, New York Times reporter Jeremy Peters. And by the way, Sam and Jeremy are MSNBC contributors. Well, that was a chuckle, certainly. But let's start with, Sam, what we heard the president say. And I want to combine that with what we heard from FCC Chairman Brendan Carr on Thursday. Here it is.
We are in the midst of a massive shift in dynamics in the media ecosystem for lots of reasons. Again, including the permission structure that President Trump's election has provided. And I would simply say we're not done yet with seeing the consequences of that shift.
Well, Sam, what's your sense of what that means and what it means for people watching this at home?
Well, what's happening here is that the administration is kind of taking or talking out of two sides of their mouth, right? On the one hand, Brendan Carr's out there saying, well, you know, this really wasn't an FCC sanctioned decision. It wasn't anything that we did. ABC and Disney decided that it was just not in their economic interest to run these Kimmel segments. And then the local providers also decided that they didn't want to carry them. And therefore, the market was working. And because, you know, they were responding to Donald Trump's victory, this is what happens. On the other hand, he's saying, well, we're not done yet. And we have other targets. And we're going to go after The View. And you have Donald Trump saying, well, you know, Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers are next. And they're boasting with gifs online about how great this all is and how this is the, realization of Project 2025. And so the truth of the matter is that you'd have to put your head in the sand if you didn't believe, if you wanted to not believe that this wasn't something that the administration was pushing for. They are trying to go after coverage, shows, programming that they think is inherently liberal. They are using the elements and the agencies of the state to go about and do it. And Brendan Carr is very much clear right there, saying we're not done yet. They're going to go after other programming. The question now is, will corporations like Disney and ABC succumb to the pressure? So far they have, although there are indications that they do want to bring Jimmy Kimmel back on.
I have a question, too, but I'll leave it out there. I mean, is humor, is satire, is that inherently liberal, right? But you don't have to answer that one. What I do want you to answer is what you talked about on the Daily this morning with your New York Times colleagues. You talked about this being an inflection point. What do you mean?
So this is, by the definition of inflection point, one exactly. It's what we're talking about here, Alex, is we could be where we're tipping into serious self-censorship. Now, government censorship, on the one hand, is scary enough and quite dangerous. Self-censorship is when the government doesn't have to tell you and you do it anyway. And that's kind of what we saw happen with ABC and Jimmy Kimmel. There was a veiled threat by the FCC commissioner, and within hours, ABC said, all right, we're not going to wait here and see what the repercussions might be, what the consequences for us and our licenses and our profits will be. We are going to yank Jimmy Kimmel. End of story. So the government didn't really have to tell them anything. And the concern is that if you take the totality of what we've seen over the last several months, the CBS News settlement with Trump, the ABC News settlement with Mr. Trump, pulling this Jimmy Kimmel show from the air, that is a pretty clear chain of events, and where it ends, where it goes next from here, should concern anybody who's in the business of speech for a living.
So then, do you think, Jeremy, that if you are self-censoring, it gives critics of anyone who would consider governmental censorship to say, on behalf of the government, hey, we didn't do it. ABC did it on their own.
That's exactly what the FCC chair is saying. That's exactly what Trump, I imagine, will say. And, you know, he's being clever with his language here, right? Because he's being, as he usually does, presenting these as hypotheticals and then backing away as if he didn't just throw a hand grenade into the situation, right? So this gives them plausible well, I wouldn't exactly call it plausible. It gives them what they think is deniability because what conservatives have been saying to defend the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel is it's really a distinction without a difference. They're saying, well, ABC is a private company. They decided that they wanted to get rid of Jimmy Kimmel. Trump didn't do anything, which is, of course, just denies the facts.
So, Charlie, we have not heard much from Republicans. You had Kansas Senator Jerry Moran, for example, who said we need to be, quote, very careful. Is that a sufficient response, given what we're seeing?
Well, I do think Republicans have to speak out much more forcefully.
Again, all Trump has done is unite people. He's united everybody. I've even heard Ted Cruz come out and at least very softly, I'm not going to give him a bunch of flowers, but even softly criticize this. Conan O'Brien, who obviously I don't think was ever really pro-Trump, but is not an especially political guy, coming out and speaking out against this, because this really unites people. These attacks on free speech. We just saw a big attack on free speech in Canada today. Mark Carney's Liberal government, very increasingly aligning himself with Trump, along with the Conservatives, Poilievre, against the NDP, the only progressive party in Canada that Canadians should have but didn't vote for. He's uniting with Trump, banning musicians from Canada. There's a growing right-wing movement, liberals in Canada, Republicans in the United States, against free speech. Conservatives in Canada as well, to be clear. They're uniting. All these powerful forces, Mark Carney, Donald Trump, uniting against free speech. And it's time for all of us to speak out. All of us. And we're hearing some of that. This is a big moment. It's a turning point. Pun not intended, but I guess exists. It's a turning point in American society, Canadian society, Western society, where you're seeing, oh, you don't like this Irish band? Can't come to Canada. Oh, this very milquetoast comedian mocks Donald Trump or mocks his movement. Well, he gets banned from the air. And now the only way he can get back on the air, supposedly, is if he grovels for as an apology and then also, pays a bribe to Turning Point. People aren't standing for this. It's too much. Again, they overplayed their hand. If ABC would have fired Kimmel, look, I would have called it censorship probably, but the plausible deniability, connecting it directly to Trump, would have been tenuous enough that for a lot of people, they would have looked past it. The Colbert stuff was bad, but a lot of people said there's plausible deniability. I disagree, but a lot of people did. Here, there's none. Trump crony goes on a right-wing podcast, says, we're going to come after people. Hours later, Jimmy Kimmel is he's not fired technically, but removed from air indefinitely. We know what's up. Donald, you united an international free speech movement against you and against your cronies.